This is an analysis of How to Be Black by Baratunde Thurston. Before we go into our presentation, I'd like to discuss some of the historical particulars we probably encounter while reading this book. Political parties, the crack epidemic in 1980s, gang violence, the media and propaganda, Catholicism, the American workplace, unions, diversity committees, racial disparities, the Civil Rights era in 1954, and Black History Month. Some of the key terms we should know before we go and read through this book are sarcasm, the use of irony to mock or convey contempt, irony, expression by using language that signifies the opposite, doxa, the widely accepted rules for a group, and subtext, which is an underlying and distinct theme in a piece of writing.
The critical argument that we believe Thurston is attempting to make in How to Be Black is that the concept of race is often misrepresented in history and media. In society, however, race is often overvalued compared to the content of character of the individual.
Now let's move to just a close reading. In his introduction, he starts off with a lighthearted introduction when he creates a list of things we could do to celebrate Black History Month. The number of activities you complete provide you with a specific role with privileges for your efforts. The following, found on pages 9 and 10, is a list of the possible levels of achievement. According to the number of activities you completed, 0 to 1 makes you an honorary KKK member, 2 to 4 means that you're a tolerator of Black people, 5 to 9, a Negro lover, and 10, you're an official friend of Black America. Obviously, this is completely satire, and this introduction initiates Thurston's work by poking fun at the idea of attaining privileges for your own contributions for indulging in Black culture.
The first historical particular would be gang violence and drug-related deaths. So if you turn to page 15, the first quote would be, "Yes, I grew up in the inner city, 1522 Newton Street. I survived DC drug wars. Yes, my father was absent. He was shot to death in some of those drug wars." Then another quote related to this historical particular would be, "When the HBO show The Wire came out, I recognized so much what it was on my television screen from my memories of my own neighborhood. As I reflected back on both, I realized that my neighborhood was just like The Wire. We had drug dealing, police, brutality, murders. Well, it was almost a perfect match." So to break down the second quote, about The Wire and whatnot, he touches on the gang violence and drug activities that were going on around him. The show compared his environment to where he actually came from. The HBO series demonstrates a person coming from poverty, police corruption, and people in the neighborhood causing reckless endangerment. He also reveals these themes to help us understand the type of environment he was placed in, and it helps him visualize his struggles. He also reveals the importance of the drug war, considering his father wasn't around and that his father was involved in those drug wars, which made a significant impact on his life. One, exposed to disparities between his personal story, what the average person goes through being brought up in these conditions and essentially being a product of their environment. And the second historical particular would be Black History Month. If you turn to page 7, the quote, "In 1926, Negro History Week was established by the Black historian and author Carter G. Woodson. It was expanded to a full month in 1976 after the government realized that Black people's demands for self-determination and equal seat at the table of American opportunity could be satisfied either through a comprehensive program of economic and political empowerment. And to break down this, Black History Month was created to focus the attention on the contributions of Black African Americans in the U.S. It honors all Black people from the periods of the U.S. history. He reveals the importance of Black History Month and why it should be celebrated. He also talks about the significance of it, and not to mention the other months that have the same type of significant meaning to it. Then he reveals the 10 ways of a Black person and how they can celebrate Black History Month. But in the author's way, he uses sarcastic and humorous manner when describing these events.
The next thing I'd like to talk about in this close read is the White Student Union. Thurston remembers a specific question that was asked by a white student while he was in class one day. The question was, why don't we have a white student union? On page 77, he states, "My mind immediately flashed to previous iterations of white student unions, white citizens councils, Ku Klux Klan rallies, and Dave Matthews Band concerts. No one told her that the entire school was essentially a white student union." Here, this quote's kind of attacking the idea of the white student unions and white representation. Why would a nation with a majority of the population being white need groups to help represent these individuals? The next piece I would like to close read is the U.S. propaganda machine. In this chapter, Thurston wrote a piece in middle school addressing how propaganda affects the Black race. He writes, "We of the Negro race are suffering more than any other race in the world from propaganda. Propaganda to destroy our hopes, our ambitions, our confidence, and eventually ourselves. The propaganda Thurston mentions manifests itself in 3 different forms: the church, the school, and mass media, all found on page 73. The church, through its teachings of a white Jesus, some, if even a few people know of Africa's greatness as having the first trace of civilization. The school, through their teaching, or should I say non-teaching, of African and African American history, and the media, which portrays the whites being superior throughout history." The next piece of the book I'd like to discuss is Thurston's Guide for Being the Angry Negro. In this chapter, Thurston explains that sometimes in America, being Black demands that one get angry. He states on page 173, "As the angry Negro, you are committing yourself to a life of hate. You are agreeing to always be disagreeable. You are shameless. You are unforgiving. You only see the world through race-tinted glasses. You are, basically, an asshole." Next, Thurston provides us with a manual for being the angry Negro. This is a guide that involves being closed-minded and racially driven. Here, he is attacking the mindset of someone who is blind to perspective and chooses to make race a topic in every discussion for any situation.
On pages 171 to 177, Thurston goes into more detail about that topic by attacking people who assign race and base their entire persona off of race, even when it isn't relevant to the situation, and how it is a quick way to get on the bad side of others. This is demonstrated in the following 2 passages. The first passage is on pages 174 to 175, and it is titled, "Maximize the Discomfort of White People." White people's comfort is not your concern. In fact, when around white people, you take great pleasure in making them feel uncomfortable. This doesn't have to depend on them prompting you with some race-related question. It's actually better if the subject of race is nowhere near the conversation. For example, when in an elevator with one or more white people, quietly but firmly say something like the following. It wasn't that long ago that people like me weren't allowed in this elevator. The good old times, huh? And the second passage on page 176, titled, Maximize the Discomfort of Black People. Do not expend your rage solely on white people. Think bigger. From your point of view, your black friends and associates and even black strangers cannot be black enough. It's not always their fault, but you do get tired of being the consciousness of the group. They've been so brainwashed by mainstream society, so miseducated, that you understand it's up to you to set them on a more correct course, especially if they seem to reject your solutions. Many of the black people around you act like race doesn't define everything in the world. It's your job to remind them that it does. These two passages satirize the overvalue of one's race, be it black or white. I think these passages and the chapter as a whole, Thurston is saying that treating race as someone's sole definer is a major issue, and bringing race into every conversation is not necessary and actually quite a problem. On pages 173 to 174, Thurston gives examples of answering fairly mundane questions that have nothing to do with race-related answers, that just make the person who asked the question uncomfortable and confused. I seriously doubt he actually wants anyone to go out after reading this and act like how he describes. He even ends the chapter with, remember that when people inevitably start to distance themselves from you, being hated is part of the job. This was on page 177. He acknowledges that civil rights activists that treat race as a defining factor of someone as opposed to just a description like eye color or hair color actually do the opposite of what they strive to achieve, and further exacerbate the current issues facing America. The next topic will be on diversity committees and the American workplace as a whole. In the chapter, How to Be the Black Employee, Thurston details the extra work a black person has to endure in a workplace environment. The following passage on page 150 and 151 exhibits this. The thing is, you were also hired for another job, your blackness. That's not to say you were merely accepted due to some affirmative action quota. If that were the case, nothing more would be expected of you than simply being black and doing job number one above. Job number one above being the job you were hired for, out of quote. That would make you a research associate who happens to be black. No, you have another job with a specific responsibility far beyond inhabiting your skin. The people who hired you likely weren't conscious of this extra job. It's not as if they had one meeting about your research skills and another about your black talents. Nevertheless, they expect great things from you, even if subconsciously. In job number 2, you will be expected to do the following. Part A, represent the black community. Part B, defend the company against charges of racism or lack of diversity. And Part C, increase the coolness of the office environment by enthusiastically participating in company events. This passage and the chapter as a whole touches on the double role a black employee has in the workplace. Companies in modern-day America tend to treat black people as deflectors from potential misdeeds. This is similar to how some white people would deflect accusation of racism with the phrase, well, I have friends that are black, so I can't be racist. In terms of companies, it's basically the same thing. I have black employees, so I'm not a racist company. This passage and chapter emphasizes the unfortunate absurdness of the way companies treat their employees of color, using a mix of sarcasm and, and humor, just humor in general, in the way he describes how black people have to work in the workplace. And to conclude our presentation, we want to leave you with 2 discussion questions. The first question is, in the chapter, The Future of Blackness, Thurston puts forth the grand unified theory of blackness, which consists of new black history, distributed struggle, and the center of experimental blackness. Given today's current political climate, do you believe the grand unified theory of blackness is an effective step to uniting the people of America against racism? The second question will be, Thurston uses exaggeration and reversal in a humorous manner quite often throughout the book to draw a reaction from its readers. Were these effective methods for getting his points across to his audience, or do you think the humor may have drowned out his points?
All right. Well, those questions will